This season has been an absolute disaster for the New York Mets. After spending historic amounts of money to try to put together a World Series winning roster, the Mets are currently sitting at 50-56. Fourth place in the division, 18.5 games back, and 7 games back of the final wildcard spot. With World Series or bust being the only expectation for this team this year, it's absolutely shocking to see where the Mets are at, and that instead of being buyers here at the deadline, they were one of the biggest sellers. To kick everything off, you had closer David Robertson get traded within the division to the Marlins. Then starting pitcher Max Scherzer went to talk to the GM about what the future of this team was, and he ended up asking for a trade and getting sent to the Texas Rangers, followed by their other frontline starter Justin Verlander being sent back to the Astros, and then you had outfielders Tommy Pham and Mark Canha being sent to Arizona and Milwaukee respectively. So how did we get here? How did the team with not only the highest payroll this season, but the highest payroll ever, with World Series or bust as their only goal, get blown up after half of a season? Well, first, during the offseason, the Mets had re-signed center fielder Brandon Nimmo, closer Edwin Diaz, and reliever Adam Ottavino, but they also went out and added 3 starting pitchers in future Hall of Famer Justin Verlander, Kodai Senga, who is this year's premier arm coming over from Japan with this mythical ghost fork pitch, and Jose Quintana, as well as David Robertson, catcher Omar Narvaez, and MILF advocate Tommy Pham. But before the season would even start, the Mets were already getting hit hard. Celebrating a win in the World Baseball Classic, closer Edwin Diaz tore his patellar tendon and he was done for the year. Jose Quintana would have to get bone graft surgery on his ribs, and Justin Verlander would be out as well with a strained shoulder. So the Mets were going into this season with 2 holes in the starting rotation, one of which was the reigning AL Cy Young winner and the top closer in baseball from 2022. And it's the first part of this that's been a pretty big problem here for the Mets this season. The starting rotation has just been battered and bruised all year, with Carlos Carrasco also going on the IL on April 15th with a bone chip in his elbow, returning over a month later on May 19th. Verlander came back to make 16 starts, going 94 1/3 innings with a 3.15 ERA and a 3.81 FIP, but both his strikeout percentage and walk percentage have gotten noticeably worse from last year. Quintana has just recently made it back on the field, only making 3 starts with a 3.57 ERA and a 2.99 FIP. Then Carrasco has made 15 starts, going 70 1/3 innings with a 6.40 ERA and a 5.78 FIP. Just struggling all around with strikeouts, walks, home runs, and hits. So with all 3 of these guys missing chunks of the season here, the Mets really needed the rest of the rotation to try to help hold things together, and these guys have had their own struggles. Scherzer was supposed to hold down the top of the rotation with Verlander being out, but in 19 starts he managed a 4.01 ERA and a 4.72 FIP through 107 2/3 innings, really struggling with giving up the long ball, almost 2 homers per 9. Then Senga in his 19 starts went 105 innings with a 3.17 ERA and a 3.79 FIP, handling major league hitters pretty well actually, but just really struggling with walking guys 11.9% of the time. Then to hold down more of the depth spots in the rotation, the Mets turned to Tyler McGill and David Peterson, with both of these guys really just struggling to keep it all together. McGill put up a 5.17 ERA and a 5.10 FIP in 71 1/3 innings through 15 starts, and Peterson put up a 6.46 ERA and a 4.54 FIP in 54 1/3 innings through 11 starts. I mean, you weren't hoping for either of these guys to be world beaters by any means here, but the Mets definitely needed better production from these guys, at least until their main pitchers could come back. And overall, this rotation's ranked 14th in ERA, but hasn't exactly been pitching as great as that looks. Ranked 23rd in FIP and 27th in FWAR. The rotation's gotten pretty decent results so far, but usually a noticeable difference like this points to a bit of luck that's gonna kind of more even out towards how well the pitcher is actually pitching. And as far as how the Mets starters have really been pitching, you don't have to look any farther than the simplest part of pitching, and that's just throwing strikes. If you've ever stepped foot on a mound on any level of baseball, I'm about to hit you right in the PTSD here, because we've all had that one coach that's yelled at us to just throw strikes, because it's that simple, right? Like, if you're not throwing strikes as a pitcher, you're probably not doing very well, because good, disciplined hitters, they're not going to help you out. They're going to make you get back in the strike zone, or they're just going to take their free base. And the Mets rotation has been the worst in the league at this, with the lowest zone percentage and 29th in walk percentage. They haven't been able to attack the strike zone, and they've been one of the worst rotations at walking guys. And all these free base runners is just putting a whole bunch of added stress on not only the pitchers, but the defense behind them too, which also hasn't been great either. In fact, the Mets have been one of the worst defensive teams in baseball this season. Outside of catcher Francisco Alvarez with 3 defensive runs saved and 11.3 runs from framing, and shortstop Francisco Lindor with 9 defensive runs saved and a 6.5 UZR, the rest of the Mets defense has been anywhere from okay to, oh God. The worst of the bunch has been Starling Marte out in right field, who's put up or down, I guess, -6 defensive runs saved and a -5.4 UZR. And his -8.2 defensive rating is the lowest on the team and 17th out of 18 right fielders with at least 500 innings this year. Then on the other side of the outfield, you have Mark Canha with 4 defensive runs saved in left field, but his -5.1 defensive rating is 16th out of 22 left fielders with at least 400 innings. Now I'll give a shout out to the catchers here, because I'm totally not biased as a former catcher myself. They've been 4th in framing runs so far, but this defense overall has been 24th in defensive runs saved, 22nd in UZR, and Fangraphs has their total defense ranked 27th. So the Mets have just been one of the worst teams in baseball when it comes to an entire side of the game, with the rotation having its own number of struggles, backed up by a really bad defense. And it's not like they're getting a whole lot of help here from the bullpen either. With Diaz out for the season, the Mets turned to David Robertson to take on the majority of the closer role, and in 44 innings, he handled business with a 2.05 ERA and a 3.59 FIP, only allowing a 197 average with a 27.9% strikeout rate. Then behind him, Adam Ottavino had thrown 44 innings with a 3.48 ERA but a 4.71 FIP, walking 10.3% of the batters that he faced, and Brooks Raley with a 2.58 ERA and a 3.93 FIP in 37 innings, also walking guys at a double-digit rate. But after this, Drew Smith with a 3.93 ERA is the only other reliever with an ERA under 4 that's pitched at least 15 innings. But similar to the rotation here, the bullpen doesn't quite look like they're doing too bad with their ERA ranked 17th, but again, they just aren't pitching as good as that makes it seem, with the 28th ranked FIP and 29th in FWAR. Now, just like the rotation, the bullpen you would assume will even out closer to how they've actually been pitching. And I guess just because, like, lol Mets at this point or whatever, they're having the exact same, very simple problem. Just throwing f***ing strikes. Seriously, if the pitching coach hasn't been fired yet, that dude's seat is basically a bonfire at this point, because this entire pitching staff is failing at the very first lesson you get taught as a pitcher. You have to throw strikes, and the Mets bullpen has also been near the bottom in zone percentage, ranked 28th. And when you don't throw a lot of strikes, you're not going to get a whole lot of strikeouts, where the bullpen's been ranked 20th in strikeout percentage. But also as a hitter, when you know that the pitcher's struggling to throw strikes, you can pick your spots way more and be way more selective, because you're not worried about that dude painting the corners against you. And this has led the bullpen to also being 26th in homers per 9. So while the rotation hasn't been throwing strikes, and this has just led to them walking a bunch of guys, the bullpen struggles with the strike zone has gotten them crushed when they've been missing their spots in the zone, and it's kept them from getting a lot of strikeouts where they don't have to use this bad defense behind them. So with the pitching just falling apart at this point, the lineup has really needed to carry the load for the Mets here to have any kind of shot especially when they aren't really helping the pitchers out much with their defense, but they just haven't been able to make that big enough of a difference. On April 4th, catcher Omar Narvaez went down with a calf strain, so 2 days later, the Mets called up top catching prospect Francisco Alvarez, who's taken over the catching duties at this point, hitting .235, .296, .510, with 21 home runs and a 120 WRC plus in 79 games. Then on April 17th, they promoted their other top prospect, third baseman Brett Beatty, and started to work him into the starting role, but he struggled a bit through 81 games, hitting 7 home runs with a .228, .297, .350 slash line, and an 83 WRC plus. So the top prospects have been a little hit and miss here, but we knew that for this team to get where they wanted to go, they were going to have to rely more on the big veteran bats that were in this lineup already. Luckily, they've stayed mostly healthy so far this season, with the most significant injury being on June 6th. Pete Alonso yelled from the dugout at Braves pitcher Bryce Elder to, quote, throw that shit again after he launched an absolute nuke off of him. But then literally the next day, Alonso got hit by a pitch and would hit the IL with a sprained wrist. The baseball gods intervened real quick on that one for his blasphemy. Now, he'd return only 11 days later on the 18th, and in 98 games this season, he's hit 31 home runs, slashing .220, .315, .512 with a 127 WRC plus. Then they have Brandon Nimmo hitting .256, .353, .431 with 15 home runs and a 121 WRC plus in 103 games, and Francisco Lindor in 106 games has hit 21 home runs, slashing .237, .326, .463 with a 119 WRC plus. But they've also had a couple key guys that have really struggled this year. Jeff McNeil has only hit .251, .327, .327 with 3 home runs and an 89 WRC plus in 105 games, and Starling Marte is only hitting .254, .308, .332 with 5 home runs and an 82 WRC plus in 84 games. The lineup overall has really just been about average, far from what was expected from them. 21st in batting average, 17th in on-base percentage, 18th in slugging, and 17th in OPS, but then 13th in WRC plus and 15th in FWAR for position players. Now, this obviously isn't exactly what you thought you'd be getting out of this lineup so far, but there has at least been 2 good signs that point towards maybe kind of some bad luck here, but some better results might be on the way. The Mets are one of the most veteran lineups in baseball, and it really shows in the kind of at-bats that they take, with this being one of the most patient and disciplined groups of hitters. These guys are very patient at the plate, and by being more patient and selective on the pitches that you decide to swing at, generally that's going to make it easier to make contact when you do decide to swing at something. And this is why we see the Mets lineup with the 5th best strikeout percentage and the 3rd best walk to strikeout ratio in baseball. Now, the second part of this is that taking good at bats like this gives you a better opportunity to put a good swing on something, because you're not trying to hit whatever the pitcher's throwing at you, you're waiting for your pitch to hit. And when you get it as a hitter, you can't miss it. And even with their numbers not looking the best at a quick glance here, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Mets hitters haven't been hitting the ball well. They've been jumping on their pitches when they get them, with the 7th best exit velo in baseball and the 8th most homers per fly ball. If you're constantly hitting the ball hard and getting a lot of those to leave the yard when you hit them in the air, that's how you make good things happen. And it may not have gone their way so far, but if the Mets keep hitting like this, keep taking good at-bats and squaring up their pitch when they get it, it really should only be a matter of time before the odds start to shift way more in their favor. It's clearly been a disappointing season here for the Mets. Between injuries and underperforming, this team hasn't gotten close to the insanely high expectations that they had coming into this season. The plan obviously wasn't to be sellers this year at the deadline, but here we are, and we know that Steve Cohen and the entire Mets organization's trying to win a World Series here, but according to the reports coming out now, they're not even focused on this for 2024. They're looking more 2025, maybe 2026. So how will the moves that they made at this deadline affect the team going forward? And possibly set them up to take a run at winning a World Series sometime in the next couple years. Comment your thoughts down below, and also if you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps out the channel a bunch, and that way you don't miss out on any other baseball content like this when we drop new videos on Wednesdays and Sundays. And next, make sure you go ahead and check out the video that's on your screen now to find out about baseball's unlikely war leader, Ha-Sung Kim, and a breakdown of B-War, F-War, what they mean, what's the difference between the two. Find all that out next. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Have an awesome day. Later.